Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And we are recording. Mathias Nordvig, welcome back to Weird Web Radio, my friend. It is awesome to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. It's great to be here.
Yeah, especially with all the tag back and forth we've done. And for people who don't know, we are having a late night episode here.
We are, yeah. Very much spur of the moment.
Yeah. Well, welcome to kids, family, managing it all, right?
Exactly.
See, Daniel, this is how you do it. No. All right, man. So the world really wants to know one thing more than anything. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
That's a good question. I just I didn't know about that trend or whatever it is, but all of a sudden, I found myself talking to people who were telling me, "Hey, do you know that's a thing?" And I was like, "Huh, that's weird." Especially, so I actually do think quite a lot about the Roman Empire.
Oh, I figured you did. You're not just focused hyperly on the Viking period of things, right?
No, absolutely not. I go back in deep time. And the reasons I think of the Roman Empire is because I'm like, man, they really screwed things up.
It is a fun thought experiment. I don't know how useful it could possibly be, but I think we're all fairly aware of the Constantine Christianity link and how that impacted the Western world forevermore, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if he decided Jupiter was the one?
Yeah.
And that carried forward. What's the world look like in those conditions? I have no idea, but I don't think it were quite the same.
It probably wouldn't, but I think we would probably still have seen some of the same, oppressive stuff going on.
Yeah. And with those thought experiments, it's something that what use does it really do? Something I've thought of a lot is, you get in these conversations where people talk about, if, the North had never converted. Mm-hmm. And heathenry is whatever it was in different places at different times coalesced into something more uniform throughout these last several centuries that came down to us through the generations. Now we know from Christianity alone, they've had one holy book and they can't even keep their idea and their story straight. Right? So,
ain't that the truth?
So there's no fucking way a polytheist religion coalesces into something that's consistent across time and everything anyway. But I do wonder, there was a time where we were clearly into human sacrifice as part of the practice at some mm-hmm. point, somehow in the culture, tied mm-hmm. probably to their idea of religion.
Yeah.
Do we think that would have gone away and fallen away? Or did it really take something like Christianity to come along? And not that they necessarily valued life all that great, but I think it may have influenced the common people's thinking on valuing another person's life a little more than maybe it did prior. I don't know. What do you think?
So there's a couple of things to take into consideration. As far as I know, the archaeological record for human sacrifices in Scandinavia is there, but it's not that strong.
Yeah, it's not everywhere all the time.
No, exactly. And then of course you can ask yourself, well, what are the circumstances for those human sacrifices? Why was it that it happened in the first place? But no, I think so. This thought experiment is essentially that if we had progressed into the current way of living as the one that we have now, just without switching religions, then I think, eventually it would have been done away with for some reason or other. And I mean, you can also, going back to the Roman Empire, I mean, the Romans were vehemently against human sacrifice, right? So that was a pagan tradition that developed a strong stance against that. And I am actually not sure why that happened or how that happened, but that's just something to take into consideration, that, such thoughts also developed in non-Christian settings. And the Christian argument is that, all life is sacred. Jesus was the last sacrifice, right? This is also why Christianity doesn't sacrifice animals. And so therefore it was Christianity that came up with the idea, essentially, of getting rid of sacrifices. But ultimately that's not really the case.
Right. That's why I wanted to bring that up. It is one of the most common things that gets thrown at me.
Yeah. And also, if you think about it in these sort of like in a little alternative way, any country that has the death penalty, you could consider that a type of human sacrifice as well, right?
Yeah, and I do, in fact, know at least one heathen in Oklahoma who says every time they fire up old Sparky, he raises one to Odin. So
okay, wow.
And I don't think he's kidding. That's just it. Yeah.
Well, damn.
Yeah, he's out there, folks, and I'm sure he's not the only one. So there's that. I happen to be opposed to the death penalty unless it's,
me too.
Very specific circumstances, like for sure they molested that child and fucking kill him. But otherwise, I'm up for debate on that stuff. Yeah. Boy, that took a dark turn in a hurry. Maybe we shouldn't do this so late at night. So you have a new show. Let's go there. Yeah. The Sacred Flame, and I've noticed it's gotten quite a lot of attention by folks. That you're definitely resonating with people with this one. But how did you decide this was the project to take on, and the way you're doing it in more of a kind of a storytelling method?
Well, you know what? It came from that situation of doing 100 and something episodes of the Nordic mythology podcast. And, which was, a lot of fun to do. And by the way, if anybody's wondering, Dan and I did not have a falling out or anything.
No, they met in person, and suddenly
everything was done. No, so the reason I had to quit doing the Nordic mythology podcast was, child, rambunctious toddler running around, trying to negotiate the time zone issue between Colorado and the UK, and then whichever guest we had. I mean, some guests we had were like far into Russia at some point, right? So, just think about the logistical nightmare when you then also have like a 2-year-old crawling around on your face at the same time.
I've been there.
Right. But yeah, so I decided to do the Sacred Flame because what I wanted to do was to present more cohesive thinking around the Nordic story world, to put things together in a way where that enables us to tie these old stories that we have and to some degree resonate with, to enable us to tie them directly to things and phenomena that exist right now with us, and also to reevaluate the worth of those stories, right? One of the most important things to me as a heathen is not just simply to pick up this book, Snorri Sturluson's Edda, that I of course have lying next to me, and then go through it, first page to last page, and then say, okay, yep, that's how it is. Again, because such things as human sacrifice is part of that tradition. And I really don't want to bring that back.
Same.
Right. Right. So what are we going to do with these stories? These stories that tell us all kinds of funky stuff, right? That are so removed from our present. How are we going to understand them? How can we put them in a relevant context for us now? And that's really the project, right? And as you can see, in some cases, I actually reject stories, right? With the episode I did on Vikings and whiteness, where I lay out how the wanderings of Rik or Rikstula has been used, right? Weaponized as sort of like a racial code for the North or something like that. And I say, well, no, thank you. We don't want that. Right. And I also give a cohesive explanation to why we can say that the way that poem is framed is actually not heathen at all. And if you listen to the episode, you will know.
you can find that episode everywhere you get your podcasts. Yeah. I think I like how you do that, and I like how you're comparing those stories, and I love how you're calling what a lot of people refer to as the lore, right? And I think we got into this last time we talked to each other on the show, how that's a term you're not fond of, but it is in the lexicon of most modern heathens. I like calling it Nordic story world. It has a way cooler ring to it to me,
right?
And the way you're tackling that whole concept of whiteness, especially as it's tied to that story, those folkish people out there probably cling to it like it's their fucking favorite stuffy at night. I don't know, but there's nothing in the Nordic story world that necessarily says that this is how we practice our religion, and it is only for the people who look like this. That doesn't exist anywhere in print either. Just the same as they may say there's nothing that says, LGBTQ folks or people of color or anything could be part of this because they're not in the stories. Well, who fucking cares? Neither's your Chinese food or your fucking Nissan car. But you're gonna go eat it and drive it anyway, aren't you? Exactly. Welcome to the world we live in. Something that is prevalent in the Nordic story world are things like hospitality and generosity. Those are very, very well marked, and I think that counts when it comes to treating people how they need to be treated and welcomed into heathenry, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And this is also why I've chosen that the phrasing, the Nordic story world, right? Because so the way that I see it is that these were living stories that were constantly being regenerated and reinvigorated in the pre-Christian times. People were telling these stories in all kinds of settings to each other for all kinds of reasons. And they would take different shapes depending on the group of people telling it, right? That's something that I've said like 1 billion times now on the Sacred Flame. And so what happens next is that all of this stuff becomes petrified or locked in the prison of writing, right? And then what happens next is that 1,000 years go by, and most of us grow up with this idea of a holy book, if nothing else, simply just because we're so influenced by Christian culture, right? And so we look to this material, this Nordic story world that was locked in the prison of text as well, and then we think, oh well, this is our holy book, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think one of the most important points I want to stress is that we need we need elders, we need new storytellers, people who will contextualize these stories for us now.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start generating these new stories in different ways, so that they can become relevant for us. Because the fact of the matter is that no person in the 900s telling one of these stories could ever have imagined what life would have looked like in 2023. They did not tell these stories for us to directly relate to.
Mm-hmm.
What is in those stories that we can directly relate to is part of that universal human experience, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we pick it up and feel that this speaks to us, right? But what I want to caution against is then to try to mirror yourself in it, like and sort of like assume that that your person can be found in these stories the way that they are. Your
Mm-hmm.
person can be found in the new stories that we create, but I wouldn't say that it's possible for us to find our persons in these stories in the way that they are written in a really weirdly complicated language, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like,
I love how you said news stories in there, because it's not the first time I'm encountering this phrase when we're talking about what we have as heathens.
mhm,
At Trothmoot this year, back in June, after our Grand Sumble, some rules had changed. And part of those rules, now, one thing that the Troth did for years, that I was on the High Read, currently can now call the board of directors at the time that we reversed this, but we had something called the Loki ban. And
mhm,
for 10 years, there was this notion that it was not okay to hail Loki at a Troth event or a Troth ritual.
mhm,
And under the guidance of Rob Schreier as the president of the Troth at the time, and us that were on the Read, and a very fucking crazy incident that happened at the Troth Moot that year, um, we reversed the ban.
mhm,
And as part of paying like that idea of shield to Loki, in effect, we have a very centered, uh, big Loki bloat event at every
mhm,
Troth Moot for at least the equality of that 10 years that the ban was in place. And it was a wonderful thing because you had so many people who identified as Lokians in some way or another,
mhm,
who you would watch, especially at Troth Moot events before the ban was lifted. We would be having the Grand Sumble, generally, this big event, and you would see people quietly sneak away somewhere on the campground.
mhm,
We all knew what they were doing, you know,
mhm,
and here we are preaching inclusiveness and
mhm,
failing our own membership, right? And I think overcoming a ban like that and making them much more welcome, and I saw the impact of that really since COVID kind of shut a lot of things down for a couple years. This year at Trothmoot, I really saw the impact of lifting that ban. And so many wonderful people were part of our community that may not have been part of it before. Um, and then people wanted to be able to address other beings in the story world,
mhm,
Jormungandr, Fenris. And people had some hesitation about that.
mhm,
And I'm not there to question them or belittle them or make them feel unwelcome at all. I sometimes wonder if the hesitation is taking the stories too literal.
mhm.
And at the same time, is there reason you think that is valid, spiritually speaking, I guess, to have some sort of hesitation encountering those beings in the story worlds as well? What would you think about that kind of balance? Not to
So,
put you on the spot or anything.
well, I think it's up to each and every individual out there to create their own connections and ties
Mm-hmm.
So if that's something that happens with these figures like Fenrir or Jormungandr, I mean, I say go for it. Like, that's it.
I was in the same boat. Yeah, I was like, I go for it. Yeah, like why
I mean,
not?
so so to me, just speaking from my own personal point of view, it doesn't make much sense to me to sort of establish a relationship to Fenrir or Jormungandr. But that's not because I perceive them as like negative or evil or anything like that. It's more that I perceive them um, more as I don't know, like not that real in a sense. This is
Okay.
not that real to me. And this again is not to belittle anybody who have strong personal connections to them. It's more that they're sort of, to me, they're figures of chaos. They're figures of or not just chaos, literally a destructive moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, they exist only really in that moment, and not in the here and now, in the present.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No,
Uh,
that makes sense. Would you view the other deities in that same light? Odin and Thor, like, do they only exist in the moments in which you think the story has impact, or are they more present for you?
they're much more present for me. And
Okay.
again, I'm simply just speaking from my own relationality here, right? The ways that I have established ties from my person to the world around me, right? And so, in that sense, Odin is always there. and so is a myriad of other spirits, by the way. I mean, um, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times now in different contexts, but if you go through all the source material that we have on sort of like northern European pre-Christianity from the last from like the 1,000 years from the year zero and up to roughly the end of the Viking Age, you end up with about 800 to somewhere between 800 and 900 different deities, spirits, and other figures, right? There's a lot out there.
Yeah. And
And
that's
this,
just there.
yeah. And this is tallying up everything that we have, all the stuff that we have in Sturlusson's the Eddic poems, random mentions of a deity in some other text, some engravings or carvings or whatever it is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we actually get a lot, right? And this is, of course, this number is based on the Germanic speaking populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can add their neighboring populations. You can definitely add some Celtic speaking populations, Sami, Slavic, right? Because what we really have when it comes to these traditions from the year zero and up until the conversion, right? And that goes sort of like from the 500s when we're in the French area to the 700s, late 700s, forcibly in the northern German area, and then the 900s in Denmark, and then the late 900s in Norway, right? And so on. Like when you look at all of that, those traditions that were present before those conversions, it's really a continuum of sort of similar cultures, similar ways of perceiving the world, and similar ways of relating to what we could call the divine or spirits, or
Mm-hmm.
and so in that sense, I am not very thrilled about the idea of creating like fixed boundaries between populations, and
Mm-hmm.
and because that's really not what we see here, right?
Right. No, I agree. Absolutely. One going back to the idea of Loki, right?
Mm-hmm.
For years, you hear a lot of arguments about Loki and whether or not he was even worshipped in these pre-Christian times. And I've even seen the argument put forward that he may not even been part of the stories pre-Christian times.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see why archaeology and historians and so on want to make that argument. But for me, being a very magical speaking, like religious sort of minded person, I cannot doubt the existence of some spirit that goes by the name of Loki that appeals to a number of heathens and very widely, it seems, to a lot of our trans folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you see something inherent in the stories about Loki that would draw that particular attraction?
To worship
To
Loki?
worship, to be so attractive to trans folks, to not that it's just this automatic relationship. I would never make that assumption.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. If you think about if we sort of take LGBTQ plus as like queer sexuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
As queer defined as something that is at odds with the established norm, right? Then Loki, I can totally see how he can fit into that feeling, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
being the one at odds with the norm,
That
right?
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that's my experience from talking with trans folks about Loki. That is how that connection comes about, right? Now, I personally don't see Loki as against the norm.
Yeah.
To me, that's not what he is in my version of the Nordic story world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that is how he shows up in, especially Snorri Sturluson's Edda that I keep waving around here, right? Like,
Yeah.
Snorri did not like him, right? That is very obvious. You can see
It
that.
doesn't seem like he does.
No, he
Yeah.
he calls him all kinds of things, deceitful and so on, right? And so he's out to get him, and I think that is Snorri's very in what we would call bigoted perspective today.
Mm.
Because what kind of story is Snorri actually creating here? Well, Snorri was a man in the 13th century in medieval Iceland. He was a chieftain. He was one of the few chieftains left. Let's keep that in mind, that over the last, like the preceding century, fewer and fewer people were actually in power in Iceland. He is a patriarch of some kind. He perceives himself as a future ruler of Iceland. That's what happens in his relationship to the Norwegian king. That ultimately goes really bad. He ends up, getting stabbed in his basement because of his relationship to the Norwegian king. But he thought, but when he went to Norway in 1218, he thought that he was going to become Duke of Iceland or something like that. He thought he was going to rule Iceland with the blessing of the Norwegian king. And so what kind of mindset is he operating in? He's operating in an incredibly patriarchal mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that too if we read the story about him, the Sturlunga saga, which was written in the 1200s, which describes his life and the life of his clan, right? I mean, this is the primary source to our notion that in Iceland there was a culture of castrating defeated men, right? So it's like, think about that for a second. In that patriarchal view, right? Like that's what you do to a man who's been defeated. You castrate them, right?
Well, football would look so different.
so that my point with that is that Snorri Sturluson has some really strong, very patriarchal ideas around such things as gender, sex, and sexuality. And he's pouring that stuff into his text. And that's why I have sort of come up with another way of thinking about the Nordic story world, because I don't want to give him that, to be honest.
Yeah, screw you, Snort. No.
And that's that's the whole vibe of the 13th century, right? That is that very patriarchal and masculinist way of thinking, right? Iceland at the time is an incredibly homophobic country. I mean, you look at their laws; they're incredibly homophobic. I think you could get outlawed for just like slapping a man over the buttocks. Talk about fragile masculinity, man.
Right.
So, jeez. but when we then come to our situation now, right? I mean, I can see how Loki, for instance, in the Edda, very much mirrors a situation that many people experience, right? Because we are in an incredibly problematic situation with the laws that are, for instance, being made or tried to pass around the country right now.
Right. Yeah.
Like they're hostile, and that's some straight up bullshit, if you ask me. Right? I
agree.
Yeah. So I completely understand. And when it comes to trans people in general, like, let's also think about the fact that they make up about 1% of the population, and all of a sudden, everybody's got an opinion about them. What is that?
That can't feel comfortable at all.
Exactly.
Right. I can't imagine it hard enough to grow up in a body that you feel so alien to, so wrong in. Like, I just grew up in a culture that had a religion. I was like, fuck that, and dealt with some hatred and some bullying and shit in the 90s because of it, living in a small Midwestern area. That was pretty common back then. But to take that to a whole other level, that my very body is kind of my enemy in a way. I apologize to any of my trans listeners out there if I'm using the wrong language, or saying this in some way that I shouldn't be. I am your ally. I'm your friend, and I only seek to grow and to learn. So, I'm just trying to illustrate, like, I can't imagine how scary, how horrifying and difficult that is to deal with. And then to have national attention all the way to the fucking presidency, deciding how you're supposed to live your life, let alone religiously, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and keep also in mind that trans folks are, I think, the most exposed LGBTQ group to violence, right?
It seems that way right now.
Yeah. And that's that is horrifying.
No, I agree, and it happens in heathen spaces too, and it pisses me off that anyone would be made to feel unwelcome at all to be heathen in any way, because there are folks out there who are wrapped up in that 13th century attitude,
right?
Of, you got to look the right way. You got to have the right ancestry, even though they don't even fucking know if they do. Right. And what would that count as anyway? Right. and gender and sexuality and so on. All of these things are a huge reason why I am so enormously supportive of the Troth and the mission that we have in the Troth, because I don't know what else is out there with legal team and membership and publishing that cares that much to create those big wide open spaces. I just don't. So until that stops, I'll keep banging that drum. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And I know accusations get flung around and dumb shit like that. Sometimes things get taken out of context. It's so easy. I mean, people could pick and choose things we've said right now and leave what was before and after out and put it in quotation marks and make us look bad, right? Just to clear bullshit away, right? Do you, sir, have any problem whatsoever with LGBTQ folks, specifically trans folks, even people of color or anything, being part of heathenry?
Absolutely not.
Beautiful.
I mean, I might as well tell you, I range among the LGBTQ people myself.
Well, so, how about that? Is this like an exclusive?
Totally. Yeah, no, I'm coming out publicly. Well, no, I mean, I'm a bisexual man. I always have been. Mm-hmm. I never really thought that I needed to come out. I mean, and you know, if you go into the details of you know, bisexuality and what it means, and who will consider you real LGBTQ or not, and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of opinions on that too, right?
Sure.
So personally, I've just you know, taken that approach that, you know, that's my personal business. Yeah. I don't want to take space away, you know, from those who need it more, like for instance the trans community.
Right.
So, you know, I of course know what your the accusations that you're referring to.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a situation where I definitely after having, so you know, I've of course had conversations with some of my friends about it. A gay friend of mine told me, well, yeah, there were some things in that conversation that were a little, and then they told me, and one of my trans friends also was not thrilled about it. And so I talked to that person, and you know, they told me their perspective on it, and I can see, I can certainly see that I could have worded myself much better. Mm-hmm. And this is also a promise to do that in the future to anybody who's listening.
Nice.
Because I mean, again, as we talked about just before, the trans community is an incredibly vulnerable community, and they deserve they deserve respect, first of all. And they also deserve to feel safe.
Yes.
And so, you know, I'm definitely going to do my part to do that in the future.
Awesome. That is wonderful to hear. Man, what was I going to say next? Jeez.
Did I throw you off by coming out?
I had a very good friend of mine coming out of high school who was bisexual, and she used to joke with people all the time when they would find out. They would put, you know, I kind of push her a little bit, like, why can't you just be straight, or why aren't you just gay? Why are you both these things at once? And her answer was always, because I'm selfish. And I don't know where she is today. I love her, and I hope she's doing well. Yeah. Thank you for taking a moment to clear some of that stuff up. You know, like, I don't do gotcha stuff, and I don't like to get into this kind of thing on my show, but I respect you. I love you as a human being, man. You've been a great friend for years. And when I see mud slang at somebody I just know isn't that kind of guy, and I go quiz people, what do you think about him? And
Mm.
like, and and here's the thing, maybe you don't realize, because I think it's entirely possible that you don't. Mostly because you probably wouldn't like it if you did. um, People are hanging on to the things you say because you are a cool, calm, collected, very knowledgeable voice in Nordic mythology, in heathenry, in culture, as it were, associated with these things. And whether you like it or not, Matthias, you are a leading voice in these
Hmm.
realms. You just are. And the genie can't be put back in the bottle, dude. So I think one of the big concerns that some people have, right, is when you or anyone with your level of influence
Mm.
may say something or that could be construed a little off cuff, and may have a conversation with someone who is known to be associated with some rather questionable people and
Mm.
values and organizations. It's one thing if Joe Smith does it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's another thing entirely, whether you like it or not, if Matthias Nordvig does, because
Mm.
your level of influence, I think, the fear is normalizes something for someone. Let's imagine 100 new people coming into heathenry and Nordic mythology, and they hear you say something or talk to someone,
Mm.
and now they think that's cool. Those people
Yeah.
might be okay because it's your level of influence, and
Mm.
I don't know that you'll like it, but it's a delicate tool. I think sometimes somebody on a platform as high and big as yours has become, it'd be wise to be mindful of it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I do not perceive myself as a leader of anything.
I knew you wouldn't, and I hate to break the news, man, but you have got a lot of influence, and I mean a lot.
It's like where are all these followers? Where's that life of Brian moment where you?
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Yeah, I just
No,
wanted to throw that in there, because I think it needs to be said.
well, I mean, you know, so yeah, I guess it's also taken me some time to kind of realize just how many people listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the sacred flame, I mean, that's also my attempt to sort of take that responsibility seriously,
Right.
and then offer more than jovial chit chat about Viking stuff, or offer more than uh, you know just sort of the basics, and like get deep into what can we actually do with all of this stuff? How can we rethink ourselves with the Nordic story world? That's what I think is important.
I agree.
And and that's also what I feel like I owe people, right? So the weird thing about all of this is that that book "Ours True for Beginners,"
Right.
yeah, I wrote that on a whim, because there was like this publisher that contacted me and said, "Do you want to write this on commission?" They actually said that about it started with the kids book, but then "Also True for Beginners" became a thing too in that process, right? So I figured, yeah, sure, I can do this, and then I'll try to put something good out there, and since it was commission based. I'm not getting any royalties from any of that.
It may have been a whim, and it may have been a publisher's idea, but for a little thin book like that, it's pretty good. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, because you're not trying to sell people on bullshit. It's not full of fluff. You don't have things in there like the elders of our tradition or anything like that. You don't call yourself Drighton.
What does that even mean?
Well, I don't fucking know. I thought it was a car in a Rob Zombie video. Like it's just a no nonsense here. Here's a good way to get started. Scratch the surface. Yeah, so you definitely had some influence with that. I think it was you and Daniel. But you were the guy you were Mimir's well on Nordic mythology podcast, and people just drank and drank and drank, and that's where you built your influence. I have no doubt.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Yeah. I mean, we did do a lot of episodes.
Yeah, and it struck a chord with a lot of people. Still does. So I am wondering, looking at modern heathenry, in whatever lens you've got on it, right? Because I know you've been to events, you have your own personal practice. I don't know if you've got a kindred or a group that you work with, or if it's all solo. That's not my business. What do you see for modern heathenry as something that we're doing right? And what do you see as a challenge and possible trip up going forward? Let's say kind of like big picture, looking at the next couple decades. Where can we really continue hammering home? And what do we need to be wary of?
I mean, well, what are we doing right? Well, I feel like more and more are becoming more inclusive in their thinking, which I think is incredibly important, because this tradition will live on as long as there are humans.
Yeah.
And it's important that all kinds of humans feel that they can be part of this, and so that's one thing that I feel that we're doing right, and with that comes also just those sort of deeper community and personal connections that I see out there. I feel like I see more and more of that stuff. Fewer and fewer people relegate their activities to internet, and more seem to be doing it in person, which I think is the healthiest thing that we can do, right?
Agreed. Yeah. For sure.
Because when you're in person, then you can also ask people the critical questions. So it's like, wait, the way that you said that right there, is that how you mean it? Or does that come with X, Y, and Z and so on, right? And then that can be cleared up pretty quickly.
Sure.
And that is really helpful. And I think actually heathenry has suffered from that for a very long time. Like, suffered from these, internet platform based interactions, where the thing about it, when we draw these like hard lines between us and say, I belong to this particular way of being heathen, or this particular way of being heathen, is that then we can also start using them against each other, right? And create more conflict. I'm a Lokian. Oh, well, if you're a Lokian, then we're not hanging out, right? I don't know exactly how the Loki ban actually came into effect in the Troth, but
I think I do, but I don't want to say it in case I'm wrong.
Right. So, I mean, what that essentially is creating a dogma of some kind, right? This is saying, I don't know if somebody referred to for instance, Snorri and saying, well, in this text, it says that Loki is deceitful and the enemy of the gods and blah, 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 blah. So therefore, they cannot be part of this situation right here. Like, I don't know if that's how it went down, or that was the reasoning. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know.
But what is essentially the problem with that is that is how evangelicals read the Bible, right? And we're not evangelicals. Like, we're not even Christian.
Thank goodness.
So I think we should find a better way to handle these kinds of things, right? And and not make such like strongly drawn lines around ourselves as like I am this specific thing. Like,
I agree. I think my last line I think still matters is that, line between inclusive and those folks that call themselves folkish.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely lines that matter in that regard.
A very unpopular opinion, something that Ethan Stark and I got into when he was on the show, is that they're heathen. I won't take that away from them. You remove the ideology of race and ethnicity that's so fucking important to them, and you're left with a lot of practices that we all came from the same tree on that shit. Some of the practices that are so common in American heathenry in particular came from the goddamn racist assholes,
Yeah.
It's
pretty much all the rune magic, right?
It has that's a branch which we must confront and deal with in a healthy way. But yeah, I won't say they're not heathen. They're just a really fucked up version. You go down that spectrum and you get a bunch of guys wearing khakis and waving fucking Nazi flags, and they've got the Othala rune on it. They're not heathen. They're a bunch of Nazis using heathen symbols. That's different. Yeah. Anyway,
no, I
didn't mean to interrupt.
I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I share it. Those folkish people out there, I mean, they are heathen. I do not agree with them.
Yeah, I have a very fundamental, important differences in thought with them.
And I'm not gonna be hanging out with them.
Right.
That's just that simple.
If we just need a program to rehabilitate their fucked up thinking.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think they should change their minds.
Yeah,
like that's simple, and they can do it because it's a choice to think like that. It's a choice to be that way, right?
Oh,
and
I agree.
They can change their minds, so I think they should.
I've often said in regards to one particular extremely racist monster of their ilk, that I hope that his children or grandchildren start having multiracial and biracial kids. And they do, their kids do, and their kids do, until we're 6-7 generations later with these beautiful multi-ethnical kids sitting around talking about, can you believe there's this racist fucker on our family tree? That's my wish.
I like that
idea. Wow, we've gone off the path. So, or are we on the challenges that heathenry faces? Is that what we're doing now?
I think so. I think that those are the challenges that heathenry faces, right? Yeah. The challenges are what do we do with these? With this situation that there's a bunch of really extreme heathens out there, some really extreme problematic views, and I mean, I wish there could be a space for dialogue. I wish there could be a situation where they could be convinced to change their mind.
Yeah, I try on the local level. I do. I've been a steward in the Troth for a long time, and I'll occasionally run across people. I think one of the greatest things that anyone in modern heathenry can do is to be heathen in public. show your values openly. Wear Mjolnirs or whatever you're into, like whatever that symbol is for you, and have people see you being kind, being generous, being hospitable, standing up for people, defending people, like shit, get in the middle of something when somebody's being a bully, like be the heathen that does that if you can. And I'm not saying it's required, but it's a cool thing. And I'll inevitably see someone wearing a Mjolnir pendant or have runic tattoos or something. And I fucking hate that I have hesitation sometimes to just introduce myself to them because I don't know what they're going to be.
Right.
I hate that hesitation. I fucking hate it, but I go ahead and introduce myself anyway, because if I won't, then who will, right? That's what I think. I'm the steward, so I've got to break the ice somehow and take the chance. And I've met a lot of folkish heathens this way. And I have convinced a third of that lot to change their mind.
Yeah.
Simply with one, like, did you know, like, what books have you read? Okay, I see that author. I know why you got that idea, but are you aware of these other ideas? Have you ever even cracked the spine on a different author, or listen to this podcast, or, it's something along to that effect. And instead of shouting them down, having a conversation, sometimes that works. Sometimes I just have to say, you know what, fuck you, I'm done with this conversation, and walk away too. It happens, but yeah, I think it just takes at the local level, the smallest level.
Yeah, no, that's really the big problem, right? Again, how do we even manage to convey intimate details on these subjects through the various types of channels that we have nowadays? That's something that I think about a lot. And I've heard a couple of people out there saying that my new podcast is boring.
It is.
It is.
It is. I don't know. I mean, I listen to it and I don't fall asleep.
Well, that's good to hear.
I listen to it from beginning to end too. So,
No, that's the thing, right? Like, so what does that mean? It means that when I sit down and I really do my best to present a line of thought, right, that is anchored in our story worlds, there's some people who are going to find that boring, whereas the Nordic mythology podcast they felt wasn't boring. So that's also one of the problems that we're facing, right, with the ways that we communicate in this day and age. A lot of it goes through social media, and social media was never designed for humans. It was designed for ads.
You're not wrong. As bad as it can be, it does have that beautiful side, though, because it does connect people who otherwise would have never been connected.
Absolutely.
Hi, Mathias, my name's Lonnie. It's been great to know you.
No, that's true, right? But what hopefully comes out of those connections is that people actually, interact in person and decide to go out there in the flesh spaces. And
speaking of those flesh spaces, I can't speak. It's fucking midnight, right? Those flesh spaces, heathen rituals, whatever you want to call them. I know a lot of people say bloat. Some people just say offering ritual. There's the symbol and so on, whatever you want to call them, whatever kind of ritual that you really like. But what does like a heathen ritual for you need for you to feel like connected, excited, even like to truly get something out of it? What's it need to have? What needs to be present?
Oh man.
Welcome to Liturgy Corner.
No, see, this is an interesting question because I can honestly say nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
It doesn't need to have anything.
I'll just stand there, right? No.
Yeah. No, but think about it for a second. It really comes down to one, what do you connect with, and how do you connect, right? So for me, the most important thing to have is actually a certain type of environment.
Well, see, that's not nothing, sir.
That is not nothing in that sense, but
yeah. What's the environment look like? What's your certain environment? Is it trees, lava? You like
lava? It's the trees around me and the mountains. Nice. That is what I need in order to have a functional, meaningful, connective ritual. Honestly,
gotcha.
And that is something that is very specific to me.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that I can't have really meaningful rituals elsewhere either. But so I don't know. Have you ever done any of those sort of like identity exercises?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Okay,
Give me
so
an example.
Yeah, this is a common thing in diversity, equity, and inclusion training in different ways, right? So, what you do, you can do it in different ways, but one of them is you map out your person, like I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a this and that, right? I'm this and that age, and so on. And then you can also map out bigger parts of your person, so to speak, like race, nationality, ethnicity, if you have a disability, religion, all of those like identity markers. And a lot of those exercises, when they're sort of fixed like that, asking you to put a nationality to yourself and that kind of stuff. A lot of them actually also comes with the question, like, what do you think is missing? And every time I've done one of those exercises, I say environment. Okay. Environment is, for me, an incredibly important part of my identity. And that's something that I have known forever. It's actually it's quite interesting. So what I need is mountains, and I need cold mountains.
Oh,
yeah,
couldn't be more different. And then in my head, I heard bush.
Yeah, no. To me, like mountains that get cold is just really important, and that's something that I have from being a child in Greenland.
Okay,
that was a thing. We lived in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, right? And there's a mountain. Sort of right across the like a small inlet, or I don't know how small it is. I would consider it smaller than the one on the other side, I guess. And yeah, that mountain sort of like towers over the town, and like from like the very beginning, it was just me and that mountain. There's just something there.
Sounds so cold.
It was. And here's the funny thing, like being in that green agricultural hellscape that is Denmark really depressed me in that sense.
I can't imagine. Why? I've never been there. I've only seen pictures, to be fair. It'd take gunpoint to even get me on that plane. Oh man.
There you go, right? I guess that actually says a lot about how we both relate to environment as an important part
Yeah.
of our identity, right?
You're not wrong. I mean, environment's important to me too. For me, it's water.
Yeah.
I need to be around a river or a lake or the ocean, the sea, the Gulf, something. I'm really, 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 really like in love with rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my oldest, longest running personal practices is, all those little polished stones that are in every new age shop ever.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I in my head, I think if water spirits are real and I can make an offering to them, what might they want
Mm.
that's not terrible for that environment either? Well, what's another rock in my head? Okay, but they've got plenty of rocks. Why not a pretty rock?
Mm. Yeah.
And so that's what I do. There's 3 rivers that run through the county that I live in, all of which are the water sources for different communities. One gets dammed a few times for lakes. That's for ours. Then all of them are tributaries of the Mississippi.
Mm.
And I love that these rivers are the way they are, and the way that they're kind of brownish water. There's a lot of farmland, but they on a regular schedule, they get pretty rocks as offerings.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a good way to establish relations to rivers.
Yeah. And it feels heathen to me.
It is very heathen.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of looks like, if we go back to that, the earliest source material we have to anything that looks like sort of like Germanic speaking groups practicing this kind of religion. I mean, a lot of these, it's the Matronai from the Rhineland area, these 3 female deities that were venerated in the first couple of centuries after the year 0. A lot of them actually have names that have something to do with rivers or with marshlands and so on. So yeah, it is very heathen. It is very heathen.
It feels very, very heathen to me. In my head, that like those simple things like that feel more in line with what pre-conversion folks may have been doing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I just like the idea of it. It's romantic in my head or something, but it just feels more genuine to me sometimes.
Oh no, I mean, that's the interface, right? This is why we find so much good stuff in Danish bogs everywhere, right? Like, that's where they put all their offerings, and you can even see that once Scandinavians start showing up in the English countryside. There are some cases of weapon sacrifices to rivers in England. Mm-hmm. So they sort of like revived an old thing right there.
Yeah, yay! I like it. Thanks. I've been doing it for a long time. It is easily one of the oldest practices I've had. Well, man, I think this is a good spot to wrap up the regular portion. Is there something I should have asked? Something you want to talk about? Anything that I didn't cover?
Oh man, I'm the kind of person who never shuts up, so I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole.
All right, okay. Where can people find you? The things you're doing now these days.
So I mean, you can find the Sacred Flame podcast on, as you said, pretty much any platform out there. Spotify is a good place. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You can also go check out my website, which is just my name, MathiasNordvig.com, MathiasNordvig.com. Right.
.com.
No. I do also have an Instagram, so you can find me there if you want to see pictures of mountains and
very nice
wood stacks and other things. I will of course post a announcement every time I put up a new episode on the Sacred Flame on the Instagram. So that's also a way to keep tabs on it.
Very nice. All right, man. Well, thank you again for for all the crazy shit that we have gone back and forth through leading up to doing this interview, and talk about an impromptu, hey, are you awake? Are you going to be up for a while? Agreeing to this. So thank you. Thank you. Everyone, please go check out everything Mathias is doing. Good people. He's doing good work. And if you're interested in heathenry and a new look at that, what he calls the Nordic story world, please, by all means, go check out The Sacred Flame. If you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you're going to have to come join us on Patreon. You go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or you can go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. Thank you all for listening. Please share this amongst all your networks. Let people know that you enjoy it too. Stay weird out there, my friends. And it is now bonus audio time. Mathias Nordvig, are you ready?
I am ready.
Yeah, you've been here before, so it's going to be a little different.
All right.
Yeah. Normally, I would say, what famous person's resting place do you most want to visit? And we covered that the first time you were here. Mm-hmm. And I'm tired and I forgot what you said. So I decided for this one, I'm going to ask you, what historical person, they don't have to be famous this way, what historical person's resting place do you most want to visit?
Historical resting place. Historical person's resting place.
Whether we know where it is or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know what? I would actually like to find.
Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife, what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions and magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.